The current war in Afghanistan, which started circa 2001 as Operation Enduring Freedom for the United States, still rages on today in an attempt to dismantle al-Qaeda and the Taliban insurgency. In 2009, Colonel Olaf Holm began his one-year tour in Kabul, Afghanistan, training Afghan soldiers to fly Mi-17 helicopters. His courage and dedication reflects tremendous credit on himself and the United States Air Force.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Colonel Olaf Holm. I'm the Commandant of the Air Advisor Academy. Today, we're going to talk about my year in Afghanistan, which was in 2009, where I was a Mi-17 pilot. That's a Russian helicopter pilot for the Afghan Army Air Corps, and I was an advisor to the Afghan Army Air Corps leadership. And in addition to that, I was also the Deputy Group Commander for the 438th Air Expeditionary Group in Kabul, Afghanistan. So we're going to talk about a lot of different things, but a big focus today will be about my time doing humanitarian efforts with two organizations, Global Roots, which a friend of mine started back in Portland, Oregon, and then Central Asian Institute, an institute that was started up by Greg Mortensen, the author of 3 Cups of Tea and the author of Stones to Schools. So what I'd like to do is go through, and the premise of this presentation will be a lot of pictures that will generate discussion for myself and with you. So we'll go ahead and get started. Most people, when they think of Afghanistan, they think about desert. They think about, quite honestly, when I've talked to people around the country, they've come up and said, "What do you think of?" When I ask them, "What do you think of Afghanistan?" They'll say, "Desert, flat desert." They kind of equate it, unfortunately, to Iraq, when culturally and geographically it couldn't be much more different. And so, what I'd like to do today is show you a little bit about the geography of Afghanistan. That's what we're going to start with. And so, generally, I'll ask you, "Well, what do you think of Afghanistan?" And they'll come back with desert, and I'll say, "When I think of Afghanistan, this is what I think of." And I'll refer to a picture I took when I was returning from northern Afghanistan to come back to Kabul. And I took my camera and looked out the window, and it was over the Salang Pass, which is a famous pass where the Russians had built a pass that was drivable from northern Afghanistan through the Hindu Kush Mountains. And it was absolutely gorgeous. I think you'll find that you'll see from my pictures that Afghanistan is actually a very beautiful place. And where I should have been flying, I was quite often taking pictures, and I'd like to share them with you. So let's look at a little bit about the geography. Looking at Afghanistan, it's actually about 1,100 miles across. The southwest border goes towards Iran and Pakistan. The northeast, the far northeast corner is actually bordered on China. And then up to the north of Afghanistan, you have several: Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and then again you have Pakistan to the south. So a lot of people are really not too familiar with it. And if you look at the geography, you'll see right down the middle of Afghanistan is a large mountain chain, and it separates northern Afghanistan from southern Afghanistan, and that's called the Hindu Kush. And these mountains, 20,000 foot plus mountains, and valley floor in some places up in northeast Afghanistan is actually 13,000 feet, the valley floor. So we're talking about big altitudes, we're talking about arid places, we're talking about lush green river valleys. It really is a remarkably beautiful country, and we'll go through a couple of the pictures. Where I was stationed was in Kabul. Kabul, Afghanistan is a large city. It's really difficult to track how many people actually live there, but estimates are 3 to 4 million people. It goes up and down depending on the situation. And Kabul, if you'll notice from the picture, is very, very densely populated. Again, you'll look at the picture and you'll see the homes, and each of the homes have walls around them. And in the homes, in these walls, you'll see trees and gardens. And that's pretty much standard, not only in Kabul, but if you go to the smallest village to the largest city of Kabul, it's sort of the same format. And for a person on the ground, it gets very, very confusing when you're walking in the villages. So it's like walking in a maze. You can't see over the walls, and you can't really see the next street. So aviation becomes kind of important in this kind of environment to get around, certainly with the mountains, but in the cities as well, to be able to stay on top of where you're at. The mountains. I have probably several hundred pictures of mountains alone. This certain picture is in the Central Mountains, and it was such a beautiful mountain that I went by it and I said, oh, I got to go again. So I actually circled around the mountain just to get another set of pictures. And being from Oregon, growing up on mountains, Mount Hood was my big mountain, growing up skiing and snowboarding, I got to tell you, time and time again, I wanted to land my helicopter and just say, just a minute, I'll be right back. I've got to try this slope. And that's kind of how I looked at things. And you'll see from the pictures how much I thought the country was beautiful. This next picture shows Bamiyan. And Bamiyan was a famous, unfortunately, recently in 2001, the Taliban, when they were in control of the government, did not like the religious figures, these Buddhist statues that had been there for thousands of years, gigantic, 30 meters high, huge. And the Taliban threatened to blow them up, and in fact, right before 9/11, they did blow them up. And it was very, very disappointing to the entire world, in particular in the villagers that live in Bamiyan, because they relied on the tourism at the time for people to come up and see it. I tell people that if you go to Afghanistan, if you go to Bamiyan, first of all, it's very beautiful, and the people are very friendly. You could wear an American flag on your shirt, and you'd be just as safe as just about anywhere in the world, because they hate the Taliban in this particular region, or pretty much throughout Afghanistan. The next picture shows the northern half of Afghanistan, in particular the very northern edge of the Hindu Kush Mountains. I like this picture because it shows a gorge that I actually flew my helicopter through, to be honest, just because I thought it would be fun. And it's actually very, very beautiful, and you go into this gorge, and it was something like out of Indiana Jones, just sheer rocks on both sides, and just stunningly beautiful. And then we go a little bit further to the west towards Mazar-e Sharif. We have a big base there, which is primarily Germans and Norwegians and Swedes, but the U.S. recently opened up a big portion of the base. And it shows just the open fields, and if you go a little bit further to the south, you'll see some incredible colors, a contrast of green and reds, and throughout my pictures, I didn't use a single filter. All the pictures are just raw, showing the beautiful colors of Afghanistan. A lot of my time was spent, due to the remoteness and because I'm a helicopter pilot, in the northeast region of Badakhshan. It's the state of Badakhshan in northeast Afghanistan. And the reason that we spent so much time up there, it was relatively peaceful, and there was a lot of people that needed help by helicopter. In particular, as we go on with the story, I spent a lot of time working up there because Greg Mortensen, that's right on the border of Pakistan, had spent a lot of time up there, and he asked me to help him out. So incredible, beautiful mountains, as you can see there. This next picture shows a wheat field, and a wheat field is not very fantastic, but there's a couple things about this picture. The wheat field is at about 10,500 feet, and it's being plowed by a man using an ox and a wooden plow. A lot of people have said to me in kind of a rude fashion, they say, we ought to bomb Afghanistan back into the Stone Ages. Well, I don't think you have very far to go out in the countryside. There's plowing with a wooden plow. And what I like about this is a beautiful wheat field, and it shows how hard-working the farmers of Afghanistan are. And coming from Oregon, coming from a farming family, I have a great deal of respect for farmers. And so whenever I went out and looked at it, I was fascinated by just how they could grow something in where we would never even consider hardly walking, let alone putting a wheat field. The next picture shows northwest Afghanistan. And this reminds me, I'm getting ready to drive across the United States to go home to Oregon from New Jersey. And when I go through the Badlands of South Dakota, it looks a lot like this. These open plains, barren hills, and then it actually ends up with some mountains, some smaller mountains. But right in this particular picture, northwest Afghanistan, you'll see it looks just like the Badlands of South Dakota. I was just struck by that. I was struck by a lot of things when I was flying over Afghanistan, and I went literally to just every corner in my big helicopter, and was struck by the beauty and the similarities I found with, quite frankly, my home state of Oregon, with the high desert. terrain. We're going to switch now down towards southeast Afghanistan. We call this RC East. And this area is a very violent area because it borders Pakistan, and it's very, very rugged. You'll see from this picture with some armored vehicles, and it shows terraces very similar to what you might see in Asia. And this is part of Asia, and it really shows where Afghanistan is a border between towards the west and the east. And it looks very similar to what you would see anywhere in Asia, and it's terraced rice paddies or perhaps wheat fields. This particular place, though, is very dangerous. I got shot at quite a bit in my helicopter in this particular region because we're just a few miles from Pakistan, a very porous part of the border, and a lot of money and weapons were taken through this border area. One of the things I like to talk about is if you see any sort of arable land, the Afghans are going to make use of it. If there's water, there's land. In this case, it shows a little river valley, but what you can't really tell is those are fruit trees. And the Afghans love their gardens. And wherever they can grow something, they're going to grow it. This next picture shows kind of a cool contrast. Most people, when they think of Afghanistan, they think of the desert, they think of very arid, very hot. Well, this picture shows a desert with snow on it. And it shows the sand dunes, and then on the north side there is snow. On the south side it's like a regular sand dune. So it shows a real contrast. This next picture shows an area where a large battle was fought. It's called the Whale Back, and it was where Osama bin Laden had made his escape in 2002, right into Pakistan, we believe. And it was a huge battle, and I flew across it just about every day. The next picture finally shows what most people think of Afghanistan that I've talked to, and it shows the absolute extreme desert of South Afghanistan. And from the Hindu Kush all the way to Pakistan and Iran, you do run into some very severe desert. But right in the middle of this desert, in this next picture, it shows a green area, and this is a large river called the Helmand Valley, the Helmand River. And you may have heard about this because there's a lot of fighting. The reason there's a lot of fighting is because there's money. There's money because they grow heroin, poppy, in this particular region. And the Taliban have used the sale of heroin to buy weapons and to gain power. If you also notice from this picture, I'm at rather high altitude, where most of the time when I'm flying, I'm at high altitude, because I guarantee you if we come down in altitude, we're going to start getting hailed with bullets. Kind of a hard area. In fact, this picture was taken when we were in February of 2011 and March of 2010 on the Battle of Helmand, it was called. We swept through, U.S. Marines and British forces swept through the Helmand Valley and just completely taking over the entire area, and I was one of the pilots for the Afghan Army to support that. But right next, and I mean right next to this massive green area, is the Red Desert, and this next picture depicts that. And as arid of a place as you'll ever see, and it goes for miles and miles and miles, hundreds of miles. And when you're flying over it, you'll think that how could anybody live there? And then all of a sudden there'll be looks like a cropping of weeds or something, but actually it's a family of nomadic people called Guchis. And they would move back and forth along the porous border, just living their life like they've lived for thousands of years, perhaps, and not really noticing the war going on around them. My mission goes to the next slide, and I show you pictures about what I did. I was over there in Afghanistan. My primary function was an advisor, but I had those other roles, which include being an Mi-17, which is a Russian helicopter pilot. This Russian helicopter was a real strange thing for me to fly, because I've been in the military now for 30 years. In 1984, I was stationed in Germany on the Fulda Gap, and we'd see occasionally a Soviet helicopter, a HIP, that's my helicopter, flying, and I'd say, ooh, there's the enemy. And I grew up, and if you could remember the movie Red Dawn, one of the sister helicopters of an Mi-17 is the Mi-35 or Mi-24, which is the Hind. It's a big gunship. And all my career, that was the enemy. And then here it is, I'm flying in Afghanistan in an enemy helicopter. as one of their own. It was a very big contrast for me. But in addition to being a Mi-17 pilot, which what I thought I would be doing would be flying and teaching people how to fly a helicopter. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But my primary function was working with senior leaders in the Afghan Air Force. Then it was called the Afghan Army Air Corps. And what I would normally show you is a video. That video will show you about what it's like a day in the life in Afghanistan, and you can watch that video later. But primarily I want to talk about the two gentlemen I work with on a daily basis. And those are General Barat and General Asadullah. General Asadullah in the upper left corner is a MiG-21 pilot trained in the Soviet Union that believes in the Soviet system. He lived in the Soviet Union for several years, and then he was trained up to be a MiG-21 pilot, which is a fighter jet, and moved back to Afghanistan and fought for Afghanistan, fought for communist Afghanistan. The gentleman in the lower left picture is General Barat. General Barat, if you notice, he has a beard, which tells you something, if you're familiar with the culture, that he's probably a little more traditional, and then probably more likely to be Pashto. General Barat was a helicopter pilot, and he was trained by the Soviets, but he broke away. He got his skills and started fighting for the Mujahideen. General Barat was General Asadullah's boss. Okay, General Asadullah was the group commander. General Barat was the Kabul wing commander. Generally, in Air Force systems, in any kind of system, you have conflict between leadership. And that's just Americans that are from different parts of the states or just have different values and different systems. Here we have a situation where we have two different cultures. General Asadullah, who was Tajik, born and raised in Kabul, modern, and then you've got General Barat, who is traditional Pashto Wardak province. They've been fighting for generations, these two, Tajik and the Pashto. On top of that, one of them fought for the Soviets, the other fought for the Mujahideen, so they literally fought against each other. Now they've come together at this new administration, and now they're on the same team. It was my job to get them to work together. A lot of people would say, well, boy, they must have just really fought all the time. I got to be honest with you. Both of them, first of all, are great guys. Secondly, they really cared about what was going to happen to Afghanistan, both of them. Maybe they had a little slightly different vision of it, but they worked very well together. Now, they had disagreements just like you do in any system, and we helped them work through that system. And it was fascinating to see how well they worked together, and we worked through a lot of different, sometimes funny, sometimes very difficult situations. But I got to tell you, the personal relationships I've developed with these two gentlemen, and not just these two gentlemen, but with all the air crew that I work with, really made this year special for me. Yeah, it was cool seeing all of Afghanistan. Yeah, it was cool flying a helicopter over there, going into combat and whatnot. But the personal relationships I made with my Afghan counterparts really made this a special trip. Because I'd been to Afghanistan before. I flew over there flying combat search and rescue. That's my real job, flying HH-60 Pavehawks. Did that in 2003. But I never met an Afghan, except for a guy who sold something at a shop. I never worked with one. So this is what made this tour so special. When you look at these pictures of these two gentlemen, and you think of the difficulties associated with trying to get them to work together. But look at their smiles, and you say, man, these guys look pretty cool. All right, one quick story about General Asadullah, MiG-21 pilot. He was fighting for the communist government up until 1993 when that government fell, and he was without a job. Massoud, which is a famous leader, became the Northern Alliance leader for Afghanistan, fought and took over Afghanistan in 1993. General Asadullah became an enemy of the state at that point. General Asadullah escaped and became a taxi driver in Kabul and lived kind of a subtle life. At one point, though, he was watching the news, and his picture came up on the TV saying, this man is wanted dead or alive. And one day when he came home from working, driving his cab, he found that the army of the current regime had surrounded his house. And on the television every night, they had shown people being executed in downtown Kabul, in this particular square, by Massoud. So here it is. He comes home. His house is surrounded by these soldiers. And what is he going to do? They've got his family. General Sadullah is an honorable man. He's a great family man. And he decided there's nothing yet for me to do other than to give himself up. So General Sadullah went and gave himself up. And they took him into custody. And he's in his just his traditional garb. He wasn't in uniform or anything. And they took him downtown to where Massoud, the leader of Afghanistan at the time, and he just thought, well, this is it. I'm going to be executed like so many other people had been executed on TV. And they brought him into Massoud's office, and he comes in, and there's Massoud. He's a very famous figure in Afghan history. And he looks at him, and Massoud smiles at him and tells Sadullah a joke of some sort. And he was like, well, this is a little odd right before my execution. And Massoud says, come here, I have a problem I need you to help me with. He goes, all right. And he goes, there's this tank on the southern part of Kabul that keeps shooting into Kabul, and we cannot get to it. Yes, what would you like me to do? Well, we still have a MiG-21 out at the airfield. We'd like for you to jump in the MiG-21 and go blow up this tank for us, please. Okay, I can do that. So here he thought he was going to be executed. They drove him out to the airfield, and he comes in, and there's the MiG-21. He's still just in his local clothes. They give him a helmet. They give him the oxygen mask. And then he takes off. Well, General didn't know really where this tank was. All he knew was a tank on the south part of Kabul. I mean, Massoud just showed him like a circle in the dirt. Here's Kabul. There's the tank. Go kill it for me. So General Sadullah took off on this jet in his slippers and his local garb, and he took towards the direction where Massoud had said the tank was. And he says, thanks to God, I saw him shooting. You could see a flash, and he saw where this tank was. And then he said, thanks again to God, his tank was made of magnets. In other words, his bombs hit the target. So here he was, an enemy of the state, thinking he was going to die. And the next, he has been recruited, and he's going to live, and he's going to fight for Massoud. Well, Massoud eventually fell. And what do you do then? He had to go into hiding and went to Pakistan. The type of things that these Afghans put up with, these Afghan military guys, if you can't respect how they have survived to this point, then I don't think you have a heart. So anyway, I really have a great deal of respect for these two gentlemen, and I enjoyed working with them. I'm a combat search and rescue helicopter pilot. This next picture shows part of what I do. As combat search and rescue, and in the Army, I flew medevac helicopters. This picture shows two things. It shows a picture on the left of a soldier that has been wounded and is being treated, and shows a picture on the right of a coffin of an Afghan soldier in the back of my helicopter that's been killed. They call them martyrs. And what I had to really come to grips with very, very early on in Afghanistan, probably within 2 weeks, I became aware of an attack on a base just outside of Kabul. And I went to General Sadullah in charge of the helicopter. Says, General Sadullah, we have an attack. There are many wounded. I'm getting medics standing by with your medics and my medics, and I need a helicopter to go help these people. And he goes, Olaf, sit down. Have a seat. Have some chai. Have some tea. I go, General Sadullah, we've got to go there. In my world, the golden hour. You got to get there right now and get the people back to more definitive care, and you can save their life. And he goes, Olaf, sit down, have some chai, relax. We will go, but we will go later. And I was going, why can't we go now? He didn't really clearly state it, but what I found out was that in Afghanistan, the number one priority mission was not going out and saving lives. It was returning dead bodies back to their families. And this is a very difficult thing for me to accept. That is not right. You cannot do that. Human life becomes more important than returning the dead. You are wrong. Am I right, or is he right? Where are we after all? We're in Afghanistan. This is their culture. This is their military. And it was very frustrating for me. So I had to sit down. I had my chai, and I thought it through. And then what happened, I found out, is that when somebody died, we had a higher priority to go use the helicopter and go get people. And that's what he was waiting for. And so over my year in Afghanistan, I ended up flying. My number one mission was returning martyrs back to their families. And I learned that unlike the U.S. military, where a son or daughter is going to join the military, and the parents will know that if my son or daughter is wounded, I know the American government's going to do whatever they can to get them back safely. And we will. We'll stop a war if we know where somebody's hurt. We spend tremendous amount of resources to ensure that our wounded survive a conflict. That's what we stand for. In Afghanistan, when they recruited the soldiers, and they go to the parents, and they say, if your son is killed and becomes a martyr, we promise that you will have his body within 72 hours. That's their promise, and that was a big part of their recruiting. And it seems almost incomprehensible to a Western mind, but to that mindset, that was very, very important. And true to their word, the Afghan government, the Afghan military did just that. And I flew, and it was a great honor, and I grew to understand this a little bit more. When soldiers died, we would take them to their families. And I did it all over Afghanistan. I've got a picture of that. Now it shows a couple of those situations. So what we think is right and what we know is wrong may not be so. And you have to learn that at a very early time period when you go to places like Afghanistan. And you have to look back and think who's right. It was a big moment. Certainly, I'm still a rescue guy. I think we had to go rescue him first. But I also kind of appreciate and respect what they're doing as well. Okay, like I was talking about, I'm a helicopter guy. I was going to Afghanistan. I'm going to go teach the Afghan military how to fly. What I found was that most of the pilots were older than me, had been flying for 20, 30 years. A lot of people think, well, who taught them? Well, the Soviets did. They've been learning since the 80s. I went to flight school in 1990. And these people have been surviving in combat. A lot of them have been shot down. A lot of them have been prisoner. A lot of them, stories just very similar to General Assadullah, and yet they continued. A very difficult life. And so how am I going to teach them how to fly? Well, what we ended up doing was I just go out flying combat missions with my Afghan friends right from the start. Within a week of my arrival, I had 25 hours in the Mi-17, and boom, I was out flying combat missions. And what I did was I earned my stripes with the Afghan military. We go out, fly combat, and I learned from my Afghan friends. And over time, I garnered respect, I garnered rapport, and then I could say, well, you do it this way. Well, what do you think about doing it this way? But I got to be honest with you. The Afghans probably taught me more about surviving in Afghanistan, I guarantee you, than I could ever have taught. And what we had to do is adjust. I'm not trying to make a U.S. military. I'm trying to look at what resources they have and see if we can make them a little bit better. But it takes time. It took 3 months before I could really go to an Afghan and say, how about doing it this way? And it was a really rewarding part of being an advisor. I don't always have the answers. I'd like to ask you, what do you do in these situations? And that made it all the more rewarding. And then it made me more effective as an advisor, because if you walk into a country and say, let's say an Afghan walked in here and said, oh, I'm from Afghanistan, you guys have everything wrong, let me show you how to do it because we're Afghans. How well would that be received in this room? It wouldn't. So why would I expect to have that same positive result if I would walk in and say, I'm an American, we know how to do everything right, just shut up and listen, we're going to make you better. You'd be extremely ineffective, and you might even get shot. So this picture right here shows me actually doing what I thought I was going to be doing, and that is teaching a young guy how to fly. What I didn't know was I was going to teaching him how to fly right in the middle of combat. This particular picture I took when we were going into the Helmand Valley, and this young man, I gave him the flight controls as we were taking off. I'd never seen him before, from Camp Leatherneck in, it was Camp Bastion, right in the central, just north of Helmand Valley. So we took off, and we were going to go do the supply mission to this fire base, and I had a lot of radios I needed to talk on, and I had to do a lot of navigating because it's a combat zone, and I didn't have secure radios. It means I had to use code using script of paper to cipher codes, and it took a lot of work. So I needed my co-pilot to fly. Well, obviously, everybody up to this point has been a pilot. So we take off, and we're heading towards Helmand, and I give the co-pilot the flight controls, and I'm starting to do all my communicating, navigating, and all of a sudden the aircraft starts going into a slight roll and a dive. And I go, what? I grab the controls, and I take it from him. I said, what are you doing? Why are you doing this turn? And he goes, you did not tell me where to go. Okay. hold altitude 150, heading whatever, airspeed whatever. And he says, okay. And now, again, I'm doing this through an interpreter, by the way. I give him the controls. I go back to my CAC, reading, navigating, communicating. All of a sudden, a few minutes later, the aircraft goes into a gradual roll and another dive. And I grab the controls from this young man, and I go, what are you doing? What's the problem? Have you been to flight school? He goes, yes, thank you. I go, wait a minute. You've been to flight school? I found out he just graduated university, and this was flight school. And I was his primary teacher. And we were going into the biggest battle in Afghanistan. Afghans are smart. What are they going to do? Send their most senior guy who's been through the most? No, send the junior guy with the American. Let them get shot up. And so I ended up teaching this young man how to hover after we got back from flights doing combat missions and doing, basic flying skills. And he was a great young man. He just soaked it up. I mean, I beat him on the head with sticks and everything else, had fun with him, and we did all sorts of hard work, and he never backed down. So I was so proud of this young man, and that's what I thought I would be doing in Afghanistan. I just didn't realize it would be in the middle of combat. But fun picture. The other things I did when I got there, I was running the elections. When I say running the elections, 2009 presidential elections, all the materials needed to be transported. I didn't know I was going to be doing that, but I ended up working with the UN, working with the U.S. military, and coordinating all the transport of helicopters of all the different voting stations throughout Afghanistan. Holy cow. And that was like 3 weeks after my arrival. You never know what you're going to be running up against. Doing combat assault missions, getting ready to go into a town, and you have attack helicopters on your wing, and you're all fired up because you know the Taliban's in the town, and you look to your right in the upper right corner of this picture, and you'll see a little boy coming into my cockpit. Why is this boy in my cockpit? Well, the flight engineer didn't have a babysitter, so he brought his little boy with him on the combat mission. Oh, okay, that's all right. That doesn't quite match our stereotypical combat mission. Now you'll see me going on this combat mission, all fired up, landing in this village that had been taken over by the Taliban. The Taliban knew we were coming. They beat feet. And I land in this guy's backyard. In the lower left corner, you'll see this gentleman. I landed in his backyard. And I'll tell you, if you landed a helicopter in some place in the United States, you might get shot. What does this guy do? I am now his guest. That's very, very important in Afghanistan. It's binding of life or death. Now, if you happen to see the Lone Survivor, they talk about this. And in this case, this Afghan gentleman, I became his guest. He came out with candies and tea to welcome me to his home. And let me tell you something, he would defend me with his life. And I'm not kidding on that. And it's called Pashtunwali. It's one of their most endearing qualities. It's overwhelming the amount of hospitality I was shown everywhere I went to Afghanistan. Well, I mean, I got shot at. It wasn't the best part. But if I landed and I met an elder and I was respectful to him, I am now his guest, and you could pretty much bet nothing was going to happen to me. And it was fascinating to see. Anyway, that shows that picture in the lower left corner. He was a very sweet man. And then in the lower right corner is another picture of me with an Afghan merchant that I met right outside of Kabul. Females in the military. You look at this picture right here. It shows a woman with a purple jacket. And you think, what's this woman? And oh, she's a pilot. Wait a minute. Afghans are oppressive to women. Where did they ever have an opportunity to train women? And right now the U.S. military is training women pilots. But she was trained before we got there. The Soviets trained the women. Well, why did they do that? I thought they were oppressive. No. They tried to bring a lot of the same cultural adjustments to Afghanistan that we're currently trying to do. Equality for everybody. That's a communist trait. And so they trained this young lady to be a pilot, and she was pretty decent. And I actually went flying with her. And she wasn't wearing a uniform at the time. She still felt uncomfortable about that. But she flew, and she flew good. What struck me about this particular flight was the flight engineer sitting between us, a man, was talking nothing but great praise of her and what she was doing and how she flew and how she was an instructor pilot. And he was proud of her and what she had accomplished. And it was something I hadn't quite expected. And let me tell you something. In Afghanistan, on a daily basis, I did not expect that was almost a daily occurrence. You can't make this stuff up was a common patch you'd see on uniforms. There's a gentleman in the lower left corner that I met in northeast Afghanistan, in the village of Kunduz. He was a soldier, and this soldier, what I liked about him was having been a prior soldier myself, and you sit around and you're eating your food and you're talking, and there's always a jokester in the military. And this was the jokester of this particular military unit. He just had us rolling in jokes for hours because we were weathered in, and he was as friendly, and he was so much like us, it was just struck me as odd, or maybe not odd. The other thing that really kind of interests me, I said, you were trained, you're an older gentleman, you were in the Soviet Army when you were here. What did you like about the Soviets? He thought. I think of a number of things he would have said, but I didn't expect this. I liked them because they brought us milk. Oh, I don't have any milk. That was his answer. And they always brought us milk, and I appreciated that. You never know what you're going to see. The next picture is of my beautiful helicopter, the Mi-17 Russian helicopter. Being in the Air Force, we like sleek, slender jets that go fast, and this is not it. It's a helicopter made in a Ukrainian tractor factory, and it was designed and built to survive in Afghanistan in the 80s. It's got power, it's slow, it's sluggish, but it is reliable, and it's a good helicopter. And I flew it everywhere. It was great in the dust. Next picture shows how dusty it can be in Afghanistan. It's great at altitude. I could land in small areas at high altitudes and still pick up lots of packs or drop off passengers. It was a phenomenal aircraft. This picture right here is at the bottom of this incredibly beautiful canyon up on the just short of the Tajikistan border, and we were dropping off election materials in this extremely remote location. It was so remote, even though we had been designated to deliver it. It was a village of Tongshio. It wasn't on any map. And I had this list of places. We got to go to Tongshio. And I looked at the Afghans. Where's Tongshio? And they said, we don't know. And so I had a little shura at this village. And I said, does anybody know where Tongshio is? And this elder raised his hand. Yes, I was there several years ago. How did you get there? By donkey. I said, well, leave the donkey, but will you come with me and see if you can show me this village? And sure enough, I had an idea of where it was, and I flew over it and heard commotion in the back of the helicopter, and we landed in the bottom of this incredible canyon that would be as beautiful as anything in the Grand Canyon, and the helicopter just operated incredibly. And here it is. We're in this remote location where they hadn't even hardly seen Afghans, and now they got a helicopter with a white guy coming out. They thought I was a Russian. They didn't know the war was over. So, very interesting. Okay. So there's a little bit about what I did on the military side of the house. I was an advisor. I was an Mi-17 pilot. Photo taker. I love taking pictures. But one thing I want to talk about now is shifting to a mission that I did to help people help children in Afghanistan. I don't know if I really did, but a friend of mine named Rick Montgomery, I went to high school with him, Lincoln High School in Portland, Oregon. We graduated in 1984. In 2009, I missed my 25th high school reunion, and Rick Montgomery got on Facebook and he chewed me out. Why aren't you at the reunion? Well, I'm in Afghanistan. I go, you're in Afghanistan? What are you doing to help the children of Afghanistan? I said, I don't know, Rick. I'm trying to make the government more stable. This is in the summer of 2009. And Rick told me about Global Roots, this non-government organization that he had started when he was in Tibet. And then he decided he wanted to help children all over the world. He was a high-end tour guide, and he started in Tibet, and then he went to Cambodia, and then he opened up an orphanage in Kenya. This is something he did. This is something that he felt empowered to do, and he did. And it was just incredible that he started up this non-government organization. So naturally, he asked me, "What are you doing to help the children of Afghanistan?" I said, "Well, how are the kids doing?" I said, "Well, I really can't interact with them in Kabul. It's kind of a war zone. But the kids out in the villages are really nice. And what about orphanages? What have you done to help with the orphans?" I said, "Rick, I can't leave the base. You just can't do that." And I said, "Look, I'm busy. You're bothering me." And I kind of kept blowing him off, if you will. And he kept pestering me. "What are you doing to help?" He wanted to do something in Afghanistan. That was his intent. And so this picture right here, it's titled "The Time to Act," and it shows me up at the fence in Kabul. And it was right after Halloween. It was in November of 2009. And my two sons had collected all their Halloween candy to give to me, to give to the children of Afghanistan, which was a nice gesture. And so I had this opportunity. I drove up. There were some children playing right next to the fence. And I drove up my vehicle, and I took these boxes, full of candy, and I started throwing the candy over the fence, and that's what you see on the picture. What I didn't anticipate was the children aggressively attacking the fence, climbing the fence, getting stuck in the concertina, the gate guards starting to yell at me a couple hundred yards away because they had heard threats of children being with suicide vests, and that's not untrue. And it got so bad with the kids that I had to back away, and I felt horrified at what these kids' situations were in. And I thought about Rick, and I thought about me blowing him off, and I said, okay, I'm going to do something. And so I contacted Rick, and I said, Rick, what do you want me to do? He goes, great. He wires me $2,500, actually gave my wife $2,500 to put it into our checking account. I went to a debit card and started withdrawing it. It was in a very odd place with gunfire in the background. Typical. Anyway, my friend Saeed, my interpreter, a person that I trusted my life with, is in this next picture, and is just the sweetest young man, 25 years old at the time. And I asked Saeed to find me an orphanage in Kabul where we could operate safely, that's reputable. As you know, corruption is a big part in Afghanistan. So I said, could you please go out and find an orphanage that we could support? And he goes, yes, no problem. And he went and he found an orphanage. And then you have to go through a process. You have to go through a legal process. In this case, it was the chaplains that ran any support operations by U.S. forces done individually for orphanages or any other enterprises. So I went to the chaplains agency. I said, I've got this orphanage. I'd like to help them. And they said, okay, now I have to plan a convoy. Now I have to get materials. I got $2,500. Saeed, my friend, he went and bought, he went to the orphanage. He said, what do you need? They need winter clothes. They need shoes. They need winter clothes and shoes, primarily, and socks. $2,500 goes a long ways. And there was several hundred children in this orphanage, and we were able to purchase enough clothes on the local economy. Saeed did, my interpreter. And we planned to deliver those on a convoy to down into downtown Kabul. So I worked with, I talked to my American airmen, and I said, look, this is what I want to do. Does anybody want to help? And I had to push people back. The airmen all wanted to volunteer to help with this mission. And so we made a plan, and we looked for a date to set the date, and the date didn't work. We couldn't get the vehicles. It's not easy to do a convoy. It's a high-risk mission. Kabul is not a safe place for U.S. convoys. Anyway, so one day we were able to get it done, but I happened to be gone. I was in Gardez doing a mission in my helicopter, and so my second in command, I said, make this mission happen. So on Christmas Eve, nothing to do with Christmas. Obviously, we couldn't go and proselytize and say Merry Christmas to a Muslim nation's orphans. That would be very, very bad. But it just happened to be that was Christmas. So for us, and the next slide shows the first Global Roots supported mission by my unit, the 438th Expeditionary Wing, and Global Roots money. And it was a huge success, as you can see from the children. I don't know who had a better time, the airmen that got to deliver the clothing items or the children, but it was just a tremendous success. So much so, even though I didn't get to participate on it, Rick was just absolutely enthusiastic to come back and do this again. And I thought, okay, I thought I was going to get rid of him, but now he wants me to do more. And in fact, Rick says, well, I want to come to Afghanistan. I go, Rick, you're not coming to Afghanistan. It's dangerous here. It's not coming to Afghanistan. Rick, you're not doing it. And just like it was the summer before, he kept persisting. And sure enough, Rick Montgomery in February of 2010 shows up. And I had to coordinate for him to stay on the base with the Spanish government because they own the base, with the U.S. government for the 438th, with the Afghan government. They all agreed to sponsor Rick to come to Afghanistan to live on the base so we'd be safe. I said, you're not going to live downtown. If you're going to come, you're going to come and stay with me, and we'll protect you. We'll put you on our convoys. You'll fly on my helicopters. And the idea was for Rick to come over and learn about the Afghan system in dealing with orphanages. What does it take to support an orphanage in Afghanistan? And then the next step of that process was, that region in northeast Afghanistan is so remote, but it happened to be at the time kind of safe because there wasn't very much Taliban activity, to go up in that region where other NGOs, non-governmental organizations, couldn't go because they didn't have helicopters. He had his buddy, Olaf, that happened to know the commanding general of the Afghan Army Air Corps, who might agree to give him a helicopter to fly supplies to an orphanage in northeast Afghanistan. That was the idea. He wanted to start an orphanage or support an orphanage in northeast Afghanistan, but first start in Kabul. So he showed up, and this picture shows Rick meeting General Asadullah and General Barat, established relationships, became good friends, bared gifts, and we asked, can we ask for a helicopter? And they said, yes, no problem. Mishkanes, my friend. And but first, he meets a relationship with the Afghans. The next picture shows him going out actually to the orphanage, and he brought more money, and we bought more supplies. And Rick was able to go see this particular orphanage that now the Global Roots is basically sponsoring, and my organization, the 438. So we went, we did another convoy, and all the training and planning and everything associated with that. And he did a really good job, and he got a real understanding. But that wasn't enough for Rick. Olaf, we need to go to Badakhshan, he says. Okay, so I contact, through Saeed, the sub-governor of Badakhshan, and we were going to take off in an Mi-17 helicopter bearing gifts. I was able to accumulate some civil affairs blankets and materials because it was right in the middle of winter, February, and there was a lot of requirements for that. So we were going to fly up to northeast Afghanistan and drop off these blankets, and Rick was going to meet the sub-governor to talk about setting up an orphanage in Afghanistan. Simple. Problem. The Salang Pass. Remember that picture, the beautiful mountains? On the day we were going to take off full of blankets to go meet with the sub-governor, there was a massive avalanche in the Salang Pass where we found out from a German, I don't know what he was doing up on the road. It was the main thoroughfare between northern and southern Afghanistan. Had his cell phone. He says, I'm trapped in an avalanche. And that's where the U.S. forces got involved to go help this German. Well, we found out there were hundreds of Afghans, if not thousands, trapped on this road, with hundreds maybe of killed or missing. Massive avalanche. And I also found out that no U.S. helicopters were in the area with hoists to be able to do it. The Mi-17 had a hoist and could go do this because we're talking 11,000 feet. The Blackhawks was too high. So I got involved. I was working with my old rescue guys up at Bagram Air Force Base. I said, give me some PJs, pararescuemen, and we'll go up and we'll go do this rescue. And then I went to General Barat. General Barat, you've got Afghans up in the mountains that are dying. We need to go help them. Olaf, sit down. Have some chai. No, General Barat, I know what you're going to say. We have people that need to be rescued right now. You are a hero of Afghanistan. I literally said that. We need to help your people. Olaf, it's too high. It's too high. We cannot go that high. I go, General, I take out a chart. I show him the chart with this helicopter. We can go up to this altitude. He goes, but Olaf, it's too windy. I go, General, the wind is coming right down the nose, and I laid it out, show him that we could land there. And he was so concerned, but he says, okay, you can have helicopters. And so I went out to the helicopter. We had two of them. And I couldn't find my medic. And I had some medical people I needed to go. This is up at 11,000 feet. And I look at Rick. And I said, Rick, you're a mountain guide, right? My high school buddy from 1984. Yeah. Well, do you mind being my medic on this mission? And he goes, okay. So here it is. I remember talking to Rick in 1984 at our last day. I said, Rick, tell you what, in 25 years, you and me, we're going to meet up in Afghanistan. We're going to go do a rescue in an Afghan helicopter, an Afghan-marked Russian helicopter up at 11,000 feet. You in? I mean, that's just a real typical plan. So it was just kind of a crazy situation, but that's what we did. We took off with two helicopters. I had primarily an American crew on mine with an Afghan flight engineer and then another helicopter with an American pilot. And we went up there, and we ended up rescuing 75 people. In the next picture, this is what we saw where we had freezing people up in the mountains, and we worked with the U.S. military. By then had CH-47s, Chinook helicopters that could land, and we worked with TAC-Ps on the ground, and I did 2 flights and 3 flights. It shows pictures in here. You can see Rick in the back of the helicopter carrying troops, and then another picture showing the people in the back. This is a really interesting moment for Rick in the story, in that he had never been around such catastrophe. There were bodies being loaded in the back of our helicopter. There were frozen people that were shaking and some of them barely alive, some of them getting CPR done on them. And Rick had money on board. He had taken several $1,000s to talk to the sub-governor of Badakhshan. And what he did was he gave each individual, and in our helicopter we actually rescued 52 people, gave them each a $20 bill. That goes a long way, because we flew them from the Salang Pass up in the mountains down to Bagram Air Force Base. How are they going to get home? All their belongings are in the avalanche. And Rick gave them each $20. In fact, at one point there was a young man that had his legs frozen up to his knees. Now, what kind of person, you talk about giving the shirt off your back. Rick took his shoes off and gave this man his socks and put them on this guy. That's Rick Montgomery. That's a great human being. It was a tremendous experience for him. It was very difficult because at one point it was getting dark and all the Americans had left. They wouldn't operate at night. And I didn't have NVGs, but it was so lit up from the snow. And we were going from just looking for survivors and landing on rock cliffs, and it was pretty dramatic. But at one point, I was maxed out. I had 25 people in the back of the helicopter, and we were at 11,400 feet. That's a lot of people. And I said, Rick, we got to go. But Olaf, there's more people. I said, Rick, we got to go. And that's bothered him because he saw people that we left behind. And the next day, we went up and picked up a lot of bodies that didn't make it through the night. And for him, that was very difficult. But I think he understood the difficulties that we were dealing with, and we had life and death. And that was something altogether he didn't expect. The last picture shows us when in a break period while we were getting refueled down in Bagram Air Force Base, and it shows my co-pilot, Kurt Wickers, who was also flying with me. The mission with Rick, it started. He went to the orphanage in Kabul, but we didn't make it up to Badakhshan because of that Salang Pass. The weather was never good enough for us to get north, and he had to go back to the United States. So in May, a couple months later, he sent his good friend Patrick Foyzon up from another member of the Global Roots. Now, Patrick's an interesting individual because he's a French citizen that grew up in Iran, that lived in China, worked for Amazon, on vacation in Afghanistan to help the children of Afghanistan. I mean, really, quite a normal guy. Anyway, he came over to try to get to Badakhshan. So Rick sent more money. And at the same time, I also worked with a gentleman named Greg Mortensen. Greg Mortensen was a mentor to Rick to try to get him involved with Afghanistan. Greg Mortensen wrote 3 Cups of Tea and Stones to Schools. And he also wanted to do a mission up to Badakhshan. In this case, he wanted us to deliver a generator up to northeast Afghanistan. And so Patrick showed up. His mission was to go up to northeast Afghanistan and also work with the orphanage back in Kabul, continue that operation. So he shows up, and oh, by the way, since he grew up in Iran, the language in Iran is Farsi. The primary language of the government in Afghanistan is Dari. Farsi and Dari is like a dialect between New Jersey and Alabama. Maybe difficult, but he comes in here as this white guy. He walks up to General Barat. You see his picture in there, just laughing because here's a guy speaking fluently and almost in his language, and developed a huge relationship right off the bat. What do you need? You need more helicopters? No problem. Michigan. And so first thing we wanted to do, General Asadullah took us to his school because General Asadullah, the group commander, wanted to see if we could do something for his school. So we went out and visited his school and met his family. And we went to the orphanage again. It was quite the experience. But up until this point, what I've been talking about has all been kind of warm and fuzzy, if you will. We've helped children. I've showed you beautiful scenery, but remember, this is a war zone. When Patrick went back to the orphanage in May, it was May 18th, I was stuck again doing flying missions in Gardez. And when I was returning from Gardez in southeast Afghanistan, I was approaching Kabul, and it shows a picture of this of the orphanage again with Patrick. And he went back from that mission, and I was just returning from Gardez when I noticed a burning vehicle as I was approaching southern Kabul. And I looked to my left, and my flight engineer, an Afghan, I was the only American on board this helicopter. Usually we try to have one American in each helicopter. We always flew in a formation of two, or two Americans in one helicopter. In this case, I was the only American, and there was another American in the other helicopter. I looked over, and I saw a burning vehicle on the southern edge of Kabul. And my flight engineer, an Afghan, said, "Oh, very bad, very bad." And I went into an orbit, and I tried to call my wingman and say, "Look, I see something. I'm checking it out." And then I saw Americans on the ground. And then I saw multiple vehicles, and I saw an American vehicle, a Suburban, split in half. And I tried to call my wingman back, but I couldn't get a hold of him. And I saw American wounded on the ground. And so I'm the only American on board this helicopter. I see a landing place, and I tell my Afghan friends, we're going in. I had no radio contact. I just saw Americans, and we got to go help. So I landed my helicopter, and the next picture shows a burning smoke and a bus and a wall that's been blown apart. This wall is like this thick and about 10 feet high, made of stone, and it was just blown apart. What we had come across was a suicide attacker had taken the opportunity to blow up a U.S. convoy. And as he was driving by the convoy, he detonated himself and blew this hole in this wall. I landed my helicopter at a location that was relatively close so we could go in there and help, but not so close because the tactic of the terrorists in this area is to attack the rescue forces. The initial attack and then the rescue forces. What we didn't know that this was an attack of opportunity. It wasn't very well planned, but I was concerned about it. So I landed my helicopter about 40 yards or so from the blast, and I looked at my Afghan friends, my flight engineer and my interpreter, that I have no authority over. You got to understand. And I said, "Gentlemen, please look to go help my friends." And then I got out of the helicopter, ran through, literally went through the breach on my orders, literally through the breach of hell, if you will, and went in through that wall around the crater. And let me tell you something, it was very, very scary. And it was right after the explosion, and the Americans were confused and had their guns up, and here are two Afghans approaching them. And my Afghan friends came right back to the helicopter and said, they did not want to talk to us, sir. My co-pilot at the time was that same young man that I was still teaching how to fly in the right seat. And I looked at him, and I said to him, like I tell my lab, Jenny, I said, in very good English, "Stay." I was a little nervous, and I just wanted him to stay. So I unbuckled from the helicopter, and I got out, and I ran through that wall. And you can see the burning bus. It was my Normandy moment, if you will. Bodies everywhere, body parts, burning bodies, burning whatever, and it was horrific. The suicide bomber had killed some 35, 40 Afghans in that bus, and several vehicles. And then I come up to the Americans. I see they're still in disarray, and I'm a colonel, and I'm a former Army guy. I said, "Set up a perimeter. Where is your wounded?" And they take me to a young man that was sitting next to a car. And I remember, I don't know how graphic it gets, but I mean, it was part of the story. I knelt down to the young man. He had blood coming out of his eyes, his nose, and his ears, and he was shaking. And there was a young French soldier had her in his arms, and he was really close to being unconscious. And I said, "Can you stand up?" And I noticed when I was waiting for him, there was a foot sitting right next to him. It was the most closest thing. Up until that point, I'd seen things, but I just totally tried to block it out. And I said, "Can you walk?" And I just threw him over my shoulders, and the French soldier helped me, and we dragged him through that wall back into my helicopter and put him down. And I'd seen more Americans, so I ran back in there, and I found a colonel a sergeant major, and they were both kind of covered in blood. And then I saw another American on the ground, and I ran to him, and I went down to try to help him, and they said he was dead. And I stood up and kind of looking at this man and feeling terrible. And the sergeant major walked up to the colonel, who was both of them covered in blood, and he handed him a handful of bloody dog tags and said, "Here's your dog tags." He didn't say it in such a nice way. It was at that point that I knew I was low on fuel, and I looked at the colonel and the sergeant major, and even though I was a lieutenant colonel, I said, "Gentlemen, you're coming with me." And I grabbed him and I threw him back in the helicopter and drew him back, and then I ran back one more time because I was looking for Afghans. And all the Afghans were either dead or they'd already been taken by Afghans to hospitals and vehicles. And I ran back to the helicopter, and I noticed we were very low on fuel. And I strapped in and took off. And by the time I got to Kabul, declared an emergency, all my fuel lights were flashing, and it was a bit stressful. And I felt terrible because I couldn't take the bodies. I felt terrible about what I'd seen. Landed the helicopter, and we were at a French hospital in Kabul. Got to be honest with you, it was a very difficult situation. I mean, I was so low on fuel, I was nervous to ground taxi back to my parking spot. But when I did park, and it was all over, I broke down. You just don't know how you're going to react when you see it. And then when the pressure of the moment is relieved, I started weeping, and my group commander came and grabbed me and put me, kind of protected me so I wouldn't be too ashamed. And I went back to my room and took a shower because I was kind of covered in blood. And I got back to the ops room, and I found out that there was an airplane missing up in the Hindu Kush, those big mountains, and it was an airline, Premier Airlines was missing, and the Afghans called me and said, "Hey, we want Colonel Olaf to go fly because we know he can fly in the mountains, and to go look for this airplane." And my commander looked at me, "Are you up for it?" I said, "Yeah, I want to get in the saddle. I want to forget about this day." And so I was cleaned up, got in the helicopter, and we took off, went to Bagram to find where this airplane was last seen, loaded up with lunch, and then started climbing up over the Hindu Kush mountains. And at this point, there were like 13,000 feet right there. And as we're climbing, we're not a pressurized helicopter. And as we're climbing up, all of a sudden in the cockpit, boom! Big, huge boom. After what I'd just been through. Well, we picked up lunch, and in lunch they were nice enough to give us a couple bags of potato chips. As we got up in altitude, the bags exploded. It was pretty funny. So I had potato chip dust and kind of laughed about it and went back to the business of looking for this airplane. I searched for about 3 hours looking at altitudes approaching. I don't want to record because I'll get in trouble. And we never found it. They actually found it the next day, and that's another story of importance because the Afghans, when they realized that they could go up to altitude, because I showed it to them on paper, and then I showed it to them by flying, and they gained huge notoriety because it was an Afghan helicopter helping Afghan people. They didn't know there was an American pilot up that Salang Pass. Now here it is. We can do this. The Afghans launched helicopters to go up to 11,000, 12,000 feet to recover those bodies. Remember how important that is in the Islamic culture. And they recovered the bodies of those lost souls and did it all on their own. Not a single American helped out with that mission. So I was very, very proud of that because it showed that the Afghan government could support their own people. And that meant a lot to the stability of the country. So that day ended up, I was exhausted. Seeing the things I saw, flying and the potato chip explosion, the soldiers, the death, the violence. But people knew how to take care of me when I got home. And they knew if I was upset and I got back to my room, good old cold can of A&W root beer went a long ways. They had A&W root beer and my favorite movie, The Hangover. And so that got me through it so I don't have PTSD. Was able to adjust, but I had to get right back to work. The next day, Global Roots and Central Asian Institute wanted me to do another lift to Badakhshan again. This time we were going to carry, the next picture shows me with Karimi. Karimi is the lead of the Central Asian Institute's mission in Afghanistan, and they're bringing a big generator to take to northern Afghanistan that I had to deliver on base right during a big conference, which was a lot of fun. So we got that delivered on base and got set up for the mission to fly up to North Afghanistan. And Patrick is with me too from Global Roots. And this area is called Faizabad up in northeast Afghanistan and Badakhshan. And in Faizabad, we landed and dropped off. We took off. You see the helicopter formation. We dropped off books that Global Roots had delivered and purchased. But when you use a helicopter in Afghanistan, you got to use it for maximum. And we also had mortars on board the helicopter. So we had books, bodies, and a generator. And I had to deliver the bodies to 2 different villages. And I love this picture. It shows me on top of a pinnacle outside of a village, and you see the villagers coming up. I don't know how they found out about us arriving. I don't know how we found out how to get to these locations. But the Afghans knew where they were. They would go to this village. And in this particular case, it was a little bit tight. My Afghan co-pilot was a little nervous because I landed pretty close to the tree, which you'll see in this picture. And it was a little closer than I thought, to be honest. But it shows us when we landed, I was always impressed with what would happen. The elder would have 4 or 5 young men waiting at the landing zone. And I'd land my helicopter, and I would lock eyes with the elder. And I would look at him, and the young men would be standing behind him like military. The elder is all important in the Afghan culture. I'd look at him, and I would put my hand on my heart, and I would nod my head. And that was his signal, like a good soldier. He'd send his young men forward, and they would come in and grab the coffin out of the back of the helicopter. And that's what you see in this picture. And as they're grabbing the coffin, the rest of the villagers would come up, and they would be wailing and whatnot. But there was always... It was pretty much the same scene, but I was most impressed by the elder and the young men, and I saw this scene over and over again, and it really, whereas I was offended by it in the beginning of my tour, but at this point I really grew accustomed to it and felt honored to be a part of it, and I did this time and time again all over Afghanistan. But so we dropped off the bodies. 2 different villages, and then we went to Central Asian Institute headquarters in Baharak, Afghanistan, up in Badakhshan. And there we had a whole entourage of people waiting for us. It was interesting to note at this particular time, because of the timing of it, I was not able to get there till Friday. Friday is the holy day. It's called Jummah in Afghanistan, in the Islamic culture. And yet the whole village came out to greet us. If you remember, the day before, I was literally covered in blood and the worst that man can do to one another. Had the blowing up potato chip and everything. And then here is the next day, I show up, I have a greeting party of the entire village with the children throwing rose petals on me and singing to me. Because Greg Mortensen told them I was coming and I was bringing peace. And these helicopters up till this point were brought death and destruction from the Soviet times. Now this helicopter brings books and generators. To this beautiful little setting in Baharak, Afghanistan. And it was just sort of very strange to me to see the violence one day, and then the next day everybody's greeting me. They come in, I give a speech, they give me a robe, they feed me, and the children are beautiful, the scenery is beautiful, it's peaceful, it's a gorgeous day, and it was a real contrast. But I wasn't done. We had more books in the back of the helicopters, and we flew off to... it shows pictures of the children and Patrick with the children. Flew off across another set of mountains to the Tajik border, to Darwazab, and landed in this man's wheat field, which he wasn't too happy about, and he came out with sticks and started beating the helicopter. But then he realized we were bringing books for the children, and no problem, Mishkanis. And we set up a human chain and offloaded the books, and they had a meeting of the elders to talk about building schools for the children in this extremely remote location. And the Minister of Education for that region came with us and spoke to the elders. And so we had a little bit of time, and it shows a great picture of a little girl as they were having their meeting. We were able to walk around the village and felt very safe, right on the Tajikistan border. Beautiful setting. And this little girl just looks at me with this attitude. I had to take this picture of her. And we took a group shot, and it was just a real peaceful moment. And I was thinking about what happened the day before with the explosion. I'm thinking, man, this is peace. This is nice, but don't put your guard down in Afghanistan. Now, this wasn't an enemy attack. It was an attack of a different sort. When you go to these villages in these extremely remote locations in this big helicopter, people want a ride out. They either want to go visit relatives, they want to go get medical treatment, they want to go do this, that, and the other thing, and they try to get on your helicopter. I had a police officer guarding my helicopter, but he didn't do a very good job, because right after this group picture, I went back to my helicopter and I found a situation. And it shows a picture of me going like this. And I'm trying to figure out what to do because I have a riot around my helicopter. A little boy had gotten on the helicopter, and the police officer said, "Michigan, it's no problem. It's just a little boy." I said, "Yeah, but the little boy's got a mom, he's got a dad, he's got a sister, got a brother, got everybody." Pretty soon, there was a riot of people getting on the helicopter. And it was at one point when this little boy, and you see me trying to figure out what to do, I'm trying to get people back, I don't want to hurt anybody. They were relatively peaceful, but it was getting to be a dangerous struggle. And all of a sudden, this little boy was thrown off my helicopter. There's the next picture of this boy crying, being handed up to my arms. And what had happened was somebody on board the helicopter had thrown this boy off my helicopter. By this point, there was 25 stowaways on my helicopter. And it was at that point that all my yelling and shouting didn't work. And for the first time in my time in Afghanistan, I drew my weapon, locked and loaded, and pointed it at the people, very people I'm trying to help. But that's all they understood. And I had to stop the riot. And I was upset about this child being thrown. And this next picture shows me helping him up onto the helicopter. And I look back, and there's 25 stowaways, women, children, dads, moms. And what am I going to do? I'm going to start grabbing them and throwing them off the helicopter? Did a power computation and looked at it. I'm good enough to get it off. It was a bit hot, but I had a departure path, and we took off and flew them back to FINAL1 and dropped them off. That's the kind of decisions you have to make in Afghanistan. Shows another picture of just how crowded it was in the back of the helicopter. That mission was done. Patrick was able to get up and establish global roots in Badakhshan, but we hadn't established an orphanage yet. In June, right before I left, I had one more mission. Greg Mortensen personally contacted me and asked me to deliver humanitarian supplies to this village that had been where they had built a school, and the Taliban had rolled in. It was in Nuristan, and kicked all the villagers out, and now they were living amongst other villagers and starving. Pashtun forces the villagers already there to feed them with whatever they can, so now everybody's starving. The government did not recognize them as refugees because they didn't leave Afghanistan. Neither did the Germans that controlled that particular region. So Greg asked me to fly a bunch of supplies back up to Faizabad, and then subsequently to this very remote region in Badakhshan on the Nuristan border. And fascinating, beautiful flight. Again, involved a lot of coordination. I had to coordinate with the German base. I had to coordinate with fixed-wing aircraft. I had to coordinate with the RC North, Regional Control Command North. A lot of coordination, and we were able to do it. And we loaded up with wheat and tents and plows and whatever we could in the back of our two helicopters, and we took off. And we went through this mountain pass, which you'll see. I'm flying at altitudes of 12,000 feet, and I've got 10,000 feet on either side, and nothing down all the way to a river valley. Just a rugged mountain river below us, no place to land. And I'm thinking, this is incredibly beautiful, and this is incredibly dangerous. And I was just awestruck. You ever been driving and you wanted to look around what was the next corner? That was every moment on this flight. It was absolutely unbelievably beautiful. The other thing I didn't know was Greg Mortensen had actually sent an expedition up there to this village to cover what was happening. And he sent a reporter and a photographer. And I didn't know they were there, but the next picture shows my approach to this village. And as it turns out to be some incredible pictures. My favorite pictures is of my helicopter up with the mountains in the background. And it turns out it was like at 10,600 feet that we dropped off these supplies. A lot of people didn't believe that there was actually refugees. The government didn't want to believe it. The Germans didn't want to believe it. But Greg Mortensen said they were there. And sure enough, they were there, along with this contingent of folks. I got my very first book of Stones to Schools from Greg Mortensen. I hadn't read it yet. From his people that were waiting for us. And yes, there were starving people. and we had some good coverage of that. And let me tell you, going back to my love of farmers, these are people that are just trying to survive. They're not Taliban. They're just people that work the land and are good, hard, loving families. And to see the Afghans in this area supporting these people and would starve themselves before they would turn them away. Think of that in our own culture. Do we have that capacity? So I was very proud of these people, and was able to help offload. And shows a picture of me while I was talking to the Afghans. In this picture right here, you'll see me with my finger up. This picture isn't revealed in the United States newspapers. Me, of an American sitting amongst Afghans, having a merry time, not knowing really exactly what they're saying or what I'm saying. But it was one of those great moments. I tell people when they go through the Air Advisor Academy that wherever you go, you are now a diplomat, and you have to understand that. You're a statesman diplomat, and you have to act accordingly. Go out and make friends and understand what you say is important, what you do is important. And wherever I went with the Afghans, I was always, where I wasn't getting shot at, I was overwhelmed by their hospitality and how well they treated me. And one of these pictures is with me with Karimi again, and we were successful. We dropped off the food, we brought supplies, and yet we had one more mission to do. We went back up there, back up to this Bahar Rock area, and went up to another school in this great picture of Greg Mortensen's school. Again, the children are out. Again, it's Juma, and they're singing to me. It's just a typical day in Afghanistan. And I got a tour of the school, and I asked the children, what is it that you want? What can I go back to the Americans and say, what would you like? And they said, chemistry books, science books. I would think of candy or food or something, but they wanted more learning. And I was very struck by that. And I thought it was absolutely genuine. And so I digged a little bit. Come on, what else do you want? And I was able to say, well, it'd be kind of nice to have some play toys and things like that. But beautiful children. I really, really enjoyed meeting these. In Kabul, the kids are a little more desperate. In the mountains and the villages, they're very respectful. They learned English, and they were clean. It was something to just behold, really. I told the Afghans when I went and spoke to them again, I said, I know these mountains are absolutely incredibly beautiful, but I really think what beats the beauty of the mountains, and it sounds corny, but I felt it, was the people. They were genuine, they were warm, they were loving, they were caring of their children, and what more could you ask for? Working with Global Roots, working with Central Asian Institute, getting to walk around the school, showed some of those pictures, and it was just a very good moment, because this was literally days before my last moment in Afghanistan. I'd seen a lot in that year, but this next picture, which shows something very important to me, was that mission for Rick and Global Roots was to set up and support an orphanage. Now, they didn't quite build an orphanage, but what they did was they built and supported a garden for orphans. And it's been extremely successful. And the way I market success is just this last week I got more inputs. I'm getting pictures of how this Garden for Peace, they call it, has been successful in Badakhshan to help these children with food. And it brings them together, and it gives an opportunity for people that take in orphans to have food. And the picture shows another Afghan Mi-17 landing up there in October, 4 months after I left. And the mission was still going on then, and it's still going on today. So what Rick's original idea to go to Afghanistan, to stand up and support the children of Afghanistan, it has played true. In the most difficult circumstances, in the most unusual way, he was able to figure it out and help these children. This last picture shows me with a group of Afghan children in Darwazab, actually on the Tajikistan border. And it just, how great the kids are. You look at them, they don't look that different than our kids. In fact, you'll see kids with red hair, blonde hair, blue eyes, and you go there and they're just, you just sort of gravitate towards them. It all goes back to when I think about Afghanistan, I don't think about the war so much as I do the people I got to serve with. The Afghan Army Air Corps, I think of Rahula, a very good pilot that I flew with a lot in Afghanistan. He was from Konar province, and we got shot at together one day. And he was an excellent pilot. He was probably, I would say, the best Afghan pilot. And he was a pious man. He was a good Muslim. He was not corrupt. And he was dangerous to the Taliban because he was so good. And they killed him in October of this last year. They gunned him down right in front of his family in downtown Kabul. So I think of him. I think of Ruhullah. I think of General Sadal. I think of the children. And I want them to succeed. I know it's not politically correct. I really don't care. I've seen what the Afghan people are. I know there's evil. There's evil in every culture. But the people that I worked with, I want to see them succeed. And I'm proud of the time that I spent in Afghanistan. I can look at my family and say, I did the level best. I can tell them that my peers are doing their level best, did their best when I was there. And the graduates of my academy are going over there and doing great things to this day. Are the odds against us? Yes. When has an American ever backed down against bad odds? And so I'm not ready to give up. And hopefully through this transition, things will work out. No guarantees, but I'll tell you this, that the Americans on the ground over there are doing a great job, and they're doing things people just don't realize, and they're making a difference. Thanks.